after he makes his statement. Vice Chief of the Creek Nation, Solomon McCombs.
Thank you. My name is Solomon McCombs. I'm the Vice Chief of the Creek Nation. Ladies and gentlemen, member of the Council, Creek Nation, Chief Claude Cox. Claude Cox is the first elected principal chief of the Creek Nation since Pleasant Porter was elected in 1903. Porter's death in the midst of the allotment process was apparently a signal to the federal government to begin an illegal assault on the tribal government of the Creek people. The Bureau of Indian Affairs illegally withheld funds for the meetings of the National Council. The President of the United States began illegally appointing chiefs for the Creek people. Today, Principal Chief Cox will discuss an important federal court decision which will reverse this situation and restore constitutional government within the Creek Nation. Principal Chief is a descendant of two important Creek leaders. He is the grandson and the great-grandson of two judges of the Muskogee area of the Creek courts. The Principal Chief's grandfather was a judge when the courts of the Creek Nation were closed by an act of Congress. The Principal Chief is going to discuss how the Creek people will be given a chance to exercise their sovereign rights to establish a constitutional government in whatever manner they desire. To give that government the institutions and powers which the Creek people believe are necessary for the protection of their rights and the representation of their interests. We are witnessing a new sunrise over the Creek country, beginning a new day where the Creek people exercise their right of self-government. It is my privilege to introduce to you the Principal Chief of the Creek Nation, Claude Cox.
Thank you, Vice Chief McCombs. Members of the Creek Nation, ladies and gentlemen, I am announcing today my full support of Judge Bryant's order in the recent civil suit affecting the Creek government. In compliance with that order, I've submitted my appointments to Judge Bryant yesterday of the two persons that I've designated to be the members of the commission which will supervise a process of allowing the Creek people to choose the government which they desire, to establish institutions and offices, and to distribute the lawful powers of the government to responsible and representative institutions. The Creek people are beginning the most important participation in the affairs of their government and nation that we will have in our future. The Creek people have faced important decisions in the past, which have included choosing to accept the perpetual peace, friendship, and protection of the United States in 1790, the unavoidable and tragic removal of the Indian Territory in 1832, establishing a written constitution in 1859, which the nation never used because of the Civil War, established another written constitution in 1867, dictated by the Treaty of 1866, accepting the Allotment Act of our land over our strenuous objections, and watching apparently helpless for 70 years while the federal government illegally suppressed our right of self-government. But now the Creek people are helpless no more. In a dramatic decision of the United States Court for the District of Columbia, the Honorable Judge William B. Bryant has ruled that the Creek people still have their right of self-government, that the Department of Interior, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, have illegally suppressed that right by policy which included illegal prevention preventing of the National Council from meeting after 1916, an illegal discharge of the right of the Creek people to elect their principal chief and other officers from 1907 to 1971. Judge Bryant's decision is well researched and fully documents every step in the administration of these legal policies toward the Creek government. Let me hasten to add that the executive branch of the Creek Nation in its present operation was not affected in any way by Judge Bryant's decision. His decision sets in motion the full interpretation of the treaties of the Creek Nation and the United States and the federal laws which apply to those treaties. For those of you who do not understand the unique relationship of the United States and the Creek Nation, it is a relationship based upon the principles of the treaties between two sovereign governments. These treaties were of the highest importance to the early history of the United States, and the government made important promises in order for the Creeks to agree to undertake hardships which included the loss of the historical homelands in Georgia and Alabama, at first losing large parts, and finally moving to the Indian Territory in our new home. Always the United States treated us as a nation, to the point of waging war upon the Creek people when we would not agree to give up our lands. In all our treaties, we are promised that we have the right to govern ourselves, to make our own laws for our own people, to make our own decisions about the destiny of the Creek Nation. Judge Bryant has reaffirmed the principles of the 1866 treaty, which is still in effect today, portions of which the United States government has sought to enforce. For example, the cession of lands and the modification of citizenship, while the federal government has ignored other portions. Despite the 70 years of these rights of the Creek people were illegally denied to them, the Creek people still possess those rights of self-government. Judge Bryant's decision gives the Creek people an orderly process to make these basic decisions, to establish a government, to organize that government as they see fit, to give certain powers to certain institutions while reserving other powers from them. Judge Bryant's order establishes a commission to supervise this process. The commission will not make any decisions itself. It will only provide a process for the Creek people to make those decisions themselves. A process for the Creek people to make those decisions themselves. Two of the commissions will be appointed by the plaintiffs in the civil suit. I am directed by the order to appoint two other commissioners, and I have submitted those names to Judge Bryant yesterday by letter. I have asked that the judge retain those names in confidence until he has received the appointment of the plaintiffs, in order that he can announce these four commissioner members simultaneously. These four commissioners will choose a fifth person to be chairman of the commission. The commission is instructed to undertake a thorough educational program for the Creek people in order that they have the chance to make an informed decision on important issues which they will be voting on soon. This educational program will be financed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs and will not be spent out of tribal funds in any way. I have requested that the judge consider that the commission form its own budget, hire its staff, and proceed at its own pace. The commission will also administer the elections where the Creek people will make these constitutional decisions. Every Creek citizen will have a full chance to participate in these elections, perhaps the most important elections the Creek people will ever face concerning the future of the Creek Nation. The issues which is really at the center of the disputed civil suit which caused this order is whether the Creek people can best be represented by a national council by geographical areas similar to the 1859 Constitution or through their traditional tribal town. The future of the tribal towns themselves is not at issue. The rights and privileges must be protected, and as institutions they may be maintained. However, in the 70 years since the close of the National Council, The Creek people no longer live according to tribal towns as they did then. Many changes in transportation and the economic in general have caused us to change our traditional living patterns. The judge's order gives the Creek people a chance to reflect and consider these changes and where and how we live, and to decide whether or not their method of representation in the National Council should change or not. It is the sovereignty of the Creek people which is at issue here. The judge has tried to protect it. I will do everything in my power to protect the Creek people's sovereignty. I know that the Creek people are ready for the task which awaits them, and the executive branch of the Creek government is ready to work with the elected National Council on important issues facing the Creek Nation. Thank you. Well, I don't know what questions you have in mind, but if it pertains to this lawsuit, which...
I was interested in, attached to this press release, with your letter to the judge, and I was interested in the last paragraph of it. You mentioned here funding of the commission, and it indicates to me that apparently the Bureau of Indian Affairs has got some plans for forming a budget for that commission. And I was wondering if the funding for the commission is not going to come from the BIA, where might it come from?
I think that's already determined in the judge's order that the Bureau of Indian Affairs will pay for the expense of this, the commissioner's expense in seeking out the final end results of the...
You say you're concerned that this initial decision-making will allow Bureau staff to attempt to exert some sort of control of the commission's activities. That is one of your concerns, even though they are going to do funding.
Right.
Do you have any alternative suggestions for funding?
Well, I'm sorry at this time, but as you know, these matters all concern the lawsuit here, and that I've been named as a party, and even though there is no finding of the law or finding of the fact which reflects me upon me or my actions, and I think it would be best that any other questions be that I consult with my staff and other persons to answer any questions pertaining to the lawsuit.
Maybe this falls under the same thing, but do you have any idea of how big a staff that they might require, or how long their work might go on? Or is that too big a question at this time?
I think it's too big a question at this time.
Can I ask you a question? This Harjo, is this the same Harjo that opposed you in your election as chief?
State your question again, please.
Harjo, was this the same man that opposed you when you were elected chief of Creek Nation?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Mr. Harjo getting his funds, you have any idea of backing him?
I don't have no, really no more.
You know if he's ever been associated with the Yankee movement?
Well, I think that everybody knows it probably is connected with the group.
Chief, one other question I've got is, do you have any reaction as chief to the current attempt by the plaintiffs to reorganize the tribal towns? They've had some meetings in Henrietta. I see reports the other day that they're meeting in Henrietta, and previous meetings to attempt to reorganize some of these tribal towns, apparently in an effort to, I don't know whether they're trying to circumvent the court order or whether they're trying to establish a de facto setup of some kind. I understand that you feel like, or I get the indication from this letter from past conversations with you, that you feel like that perhaps a geographical representation might be more in order than the old traditional tribal town organization. Yet I see that the plans for going on to organize a tribal council. I'm just wondering what you think about that, if anything, or if you feel like you're free to comment on it at this time.
I don't have any comment on it, only that we're just abiding by the judge's order.
Do these tribal towns, if they're supposed to organize, do they have any legality in, as far as the government's concerned? Do they speak on behalf of that tribal town? You think?
For the full membership of the tribal town? I doubt it. I doubt it.
You mentioned dividing the court order. As I read the judge's opinion and order, he wants to reinstitute or support the 1867 Constitution. And wasn't the representation of the council in that Constitution basically based on tribal towns?
At that time, yeah, probably.
Will the commission be the one that eventually decides
The-
whether
It won't be the commission. It will be the Creek people. I think you'll,
Well, the commission will make some recommendations.
Right.
And then the people have to vote on them.
right,
So the question of tribal towns versus geographic representation will eventually be decided by those three people.
right. That's the way I see it. No further questions. Well, I'd like to be excused. I have a doctor's appointment in Tulsa, and I'm running a little behind schedule. I'll turn it back to the vice chief if he wants to close. Thank you, Solomon.
Thank you, Chief. Vice Chief of the Creek Nation, I have no comments at this time. So I guess this concludes the press conference, and thank you for coming. Important federal court decision which will reverse this situation and restore constitutional government within the Creek Nation. Principal Chief is a descendant of two important Creek leaders. He is the grandson and the great-grandson of two judges of the Muscogee area of the Creek assault on the tribal government of the Creek people. The Bureau of Indian Affairs illegally withheld funds for the meetings of the National Council. The President of the United States began illegally appointing chiefs for the Creek people. Today, Principal Chief Cox will discuss an importance. The Principal Chief's grandfather was a judge when the courts of the Creek Nation were closed by an act of Congress. The Principal Chief is going to discuss how the Creek people will be given a chance to exercise their sovereign rights to establish a constitutional government.
Of issues after he makes his statement. Vice Chief of the Creek Nation, Solomon McCombs.
Thank you. My name is Solomon McCombs. I'm the Vice Chief of the Creek Nation. Ladies and gentlemen, member of the Council, Creek Nation, Chief Claude Cox. Claude Cox is the first elected Principal Chief of the Creek Nation since Pleasant Porter was elected in 1903. Porter's death in the midst of the allotment process was apparently a signal to the federal government to begin an illegal